Hey, I'm Markia. Want to hear something scary?
A death promised. When they were 13, Nikki and Annalise were inseparable. What made the two best friends so close was their insatiable curiosity for everything strange and spooky. Magic workings with herbs, spirits, and, very, very rarely, blood pacts. They loved doing it all. And the one thing that always captivated them most was the old dilapidated house on Warren Way. Their parents told them to stay away from the house because a very suspicious old woman lived there, but the girls suspected something more. They had heard the woman did magic works involving curses and other forms of very dark magic, and that is what intrigued Nikki and Annalise. One day, they worked up the courage to visit the old woman. They approached the house with visions of bubbling potions and dusty spellbooks running through their heads, but what awaited them was something far more powerful. Before Nikki could knock on the door, it swung open with a loud creak, revealing a tiny, harmless-looking old woman. Her skin was as wrinkled as her clothes, but she had kind eyes. She welcomed them inside, asking them what had compelled them to visit her. They were silent. She asked if they wanted to maybe lay a curse on someone. They shook their heads, shrugged their shoulders. The old woman paused, and then, smiling wickedly, said, "Do you want to know how you will die?" The girls looked at each other, and their eyes widened. Annalise nodded, and the woman ushered the girls to an antique lace-covered table, covered in ritualistic fare. Nikki and Annalise exchanged a look and giggled. This was exactly the kind of thing they were hoping for. But when the old woman sat down, things got serious. She held a doll that looked exactly like Annalise. Straight red hair, green eyes, and pale pink skin. The old woman examined Annalise and the doll, and then closed her eyes. After an impossibly long silence, the crafty magic user spoke. "You will be poisoned by the one you love most." Annalise clenched Nikki's hand under the table as they watched the little doll transform. It no longer looked like Annalise. It now had curly brown hair, brown eyes, and tawny beige skin, exactly like Nikki. They both gasped. This woman really was magical. She shushed them and then studied Nikki. She sat in silence even longer until she looked at Nikki with an almost gleeful expression on her weathered face. "You will choke to death on your own hair, fed to you by a woman named Magdalena," the death teller warned. Suddenly, there was a loud, thunderous crack as a gust of wind blew through the abode, sending dust and cobwebs everywhere. Both Nikki and Annalise screamed and ran as fast as they could out of the house. Outside, with the wind howling around them, they finally swore their strongest blood pact to take revenge on the other's killer, even after death. A crack of thunder then had them screaming and running to their separate homes. However, soon after that, their friendship was never quite the same, and eventually, they drifted apart from each other and the occult. Nikki became paranoid and spent her youth looking over her shoulder for Magdalena, the woman who might kill her with her own hair. Conversely, Annalise lived life wildly and as fully as possible, expecting her death from poison would come at any moment. A decade later, when Nikki was 23, she heard that Annalise married a beautiful fellow co-ed she'd met in college. But shortly after the wedding, Annalise died suddenly, a tragic accidental poisoning. The death teller's prediction had come true. Nikki decided to fly home to visit Annalise's family. She felt guilty that she'd grown apart from her best friend all those years ago, and honestly, more than a little part of her hoped she could figure out a way to avoid the horrific death promised. As she drove through her old neighborhood, she passed through Warren Way to catch a glimpse of the death teller's old house. It was long gone, replaced with a small duplex. Nikki breathed a sigh of relief as she made her way to Annalise's family home. Before Nikki could knock on the door, it swung open on its own. Inside, the house was dark and dusty, as if no one lived there anymore. Nikki backed away until she saw a beautiful young woman coming down the stairway dressed in black funeral attire. It was Annalise's widow. The widow looked at her with kind eyes and said, "You must be Nikki. My name is Magdalena." Suddenly, the widow's skin wrinkled and her hair turned fully gray as she cackled. No longer a grief-stricken young lady, she became the wicked old curse wielder from Warren Way. Nikki turned to run, but it was too late. Magdalena pinned her against the wall with unnerving strength powered by dark magics. She ripped the hair from Nikki's scalp and began shoving it down her throat. As Nikki choked to death, old Magdalena smiled. The curse she had placed on both girls a decade ago was complete. Tonight, she would do a ritual with the flesh from both dead bodies and add 100 years to her own long life. But suddenly, she froze in fear as she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Don't you want to know how you'll die, Magdalena?" one voice said, as another then added, "Our pact screams for revenge for each other's killer, and both are you." The now double-cursed evildoer fearfully turned to face the wrathful poltergeist of both Annalise and Nikki, best friends reunited by their decade-long blood pact in the afterlife. Nikki then smiled and accurately foretold Magdalena's death. "Your life ends now, with your soul ripped apart by two furious ghosts."